The loner rancher waited for his mail-order bride, and a woman twice his size stepped off the wagon. Jack Thornton had always lived alone. The little wooden house he called home sat on a stretch of prairie that seemed to stretch forever, a sea of golden grass under an endless sky. The wind blew almost every day, carrying the scent of earth and animals, and sometimes dust that made his eyes water. It was quiet except for the low hum of the cattle, the creaking of the barn doors, and the occasional call of a distant hawk. To most people, the place might have seemed lonely, maybe even sad, but to Jack, it had a kind of calm that few could understand. It was just him, the land, and the animals. Life was simple, predictable, and honest. Jack had grown up working hard. His father had been a rancher too, and Jack had learned early how to ride a horse, mend fences, and tend to sick cattle. Over the years, he had taken over the small ranch when his father passed, and he had never looked back. He liked the work. He liked the sun on his face, the feel of the leather reins in his hands, and the satisfaction of a day spent building something real. But there had always been a quiet emptiness in his life, a part that even the wide-open prairie could not fill. Evenings were the hardest. After a long day in the sun, Jack would sit on the wooden porch, sipping his tea, watching the horizon turn pink and orange as the sun dipped behind the distant hills. He would sometimes imagine what it would be like to have someone to talk to, someone who could share a laugh or help with the chores without being asked. He had friends in the nearby town, but none of them could fully understand the solitude of ranch life. It was a lonely life, yes, but it had a rhythm and a freedom that he would not trade. Still, there were nights when the silence felt heavy, when the wind seemed to whisper too loudly through the cracks in the walls. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Jack had made a decision that would change his life. He had heard stories from other ranchers about mail-order brides. Some had been happy, others less so, but the idea stuck with him. Maybe, he thought, there could be someone out there who wanted the same life he did. Someone who didn't mind hard work, early mornings, and a life with no neighbors for miles. Someone who could ride, tend animals, and enjoy the quiet nights. Someone he could share his life with. The next morning, Jack took his notebook and began writing a careful letter. He described himself simply, honestly. He wrote about the ranch, the work, the land, and the life he led. He didn't try to make himself sound more handsome or exciting than he was. He wrote about his routines, his chores, the way he cared for his animals, and his love for the prairie. Most importantly, he wrote about his hope to find someone who valued honesty and hard work as much as he did. After finishing the letter, he carefully folded it and placed it in an envelope. He had heard about an agency in town that helped connect lonely ranchers with women looking for a new start. He walked into town, the dust rising behind him as he led his horse along the dirt road, and handed the envelope over to the agent. Weeks passed. Jack continued with his work as usual, but he found himself glancing at the horizon more often, imagining a stagecoach appearing with a new companion, a new voice, and a new laugh. Each day he polished the porch a little more, tidied the kitchen, and prepared a small room upstairs for whoever might be coming. The walls were bare, the bed neatly made, and a small chest of drawers awaited. Despaired. Even though he did not know her, he wanted her to feel welcome, comfortable, and at home. Jack tried to keep himself busy. There was always work to do on the ranch. Fences needed mending after the winter storms, the barns needed repair, and the cattle required constant care. He rode out early each morning, checking the fences, inspecting the water troughs, and keeping watch over the animals. Sometimes he worked until sunset, letting the orange sky and the quiet evening remind him of the simple pleasures of his life. Yet, no matter how hard he worked, a small part of him remained restless. He wondered what she would be like. Would she laugh at his jokes? Would she be patient when the work was hard? Would she like the quiet nights as much as he did, or would she crave the busy life of the town? One particular evening, after a long day in the sun, Jack sat on the porch with a cup of tea in his calloused hands. The prairie stretched out endlessly, golden waves moving in the wind, and the sky was painted with the soft colors of sunset. He closed his eyes for a moment, imagining the sound of another voice, someone calling his name, someone laughing at something small and silly. He opened his eyes and looked toward the distant road, half hoping, half afraid that he would see a stagecoach rounding the hill. Days turned into weeks, and Jack's anticipation grew. He began to notice small things more. The first blooms of spring on the prairie, the way the birds returned to the fields, and the changing colors of the sky. Each morning brought a new chance, a new hope that today might be the day. Sometimes he even spoke to the empty room upstairs, telling it about the animals, the chores, and the long, quiet days. It was strange talking to a room, but it helped him feel less alone. Jack's neighbors sometimes teased him when he went into town. They knew what he had done and found it amusing. "You're waiting for a lady, Jack?" one of them would ask with a grin. "Better make sure she's ready for prairie life." They laughed, but Jack smiled politely, saying nothing. Breath. Deep down, he knew that finding someone who understood his life would not be easy. He had built his life around the ranch, and it would take a special person to truly fit in. But he was willing to wait, willing to hope, and willing to give someone a chance. And then, one crisp morning, as Jack was repairing a fence at the far edge of his property, he saw something on the horizon. A thin column of dust rose in the distance, and he instinctively knew that it was the stagecoach. His heart skipped a beat. He wiped the sweat from his brow, adjusted his hat, and mounted his horse. The sound of hooves and the distant creak of the wagon wheels grew louder with each passing moment. Jack's chest felt tight with a mixture of excitement and nerves. As the stagecoach drew closer, Jack could make out the shape of a woman inside. But he noticed her hands resting on the edge of the wagon, her posture straight and confident. A breeze carried the smell of dust and leather across the prairie, and Jack felt a strange flutter in his stomach. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Months of letters, months of hope, months of quiet evenings spent imagining her had led to this single moment. He felt both anticipation and fear. Would she be as he imagined? Would she understand this life? Would she laugh at his jokes? Or would she find him strange and quiet? The stagecoach crested the final hill and slowly made its way down toward the ranch. Jack guided his horse to meet it halfway, his eyes fixed on the door of the wagon. Every detail seemed magnified: the clatter of the wheels, the leather straps, the swish of the horses' tails, and then, with a suddenness that made him blink, the door opened and the woman stepped out. Jack saw her, and for a moment time seemed to stop. She was taller, broader, and stronger than he had imagined. She had a wide, friendly smile and a sparkle in her eyes that immediately put him at ease. She laughed, a clear, bright sound that carried across the prairie, and Jack realized that whatever he had imagined, this was something new, something real, and maybe even better. The wind blew her hair around her face, and she straightened, brushing off the dust. She looked at Jack and said, "You must be Jack Thornton. I hope you're ready for me." Her voice was warm, confident, and full of life. Jack swallowed hard and nodded, unsure whether to laugh, shake her hand, or simply stare. He realized that the woman who had stepped off the wagon was nothing like the quiet, delicate figure he had imagined in his letters. She was different. Stronger, bolder, larger than life. And yet, there was something about her that made Jack feel that somehow she belonged here, in this wide-open prairie, by his side. As he led her toward the ranch, Jack felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. He did not know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long while he felt hope. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, golden and open, and for the first time in years Jack felt that perhaps he would not be alone. Jack watched, still on his horse, as the woman stepped off the stagecoach. She was taller and broader than he had expected, with strong shoulders and arms that hinted at a life of hard work. Her boots were scuffed, her dress covered in dust, but her smile was bright, and her eyes sparkled with humor and curiosity. Jack had imagined a quiet, delicate woman, soft-spoken and timid, someone who would quietly adjust to his life. But this woman, this Martha, had an energy about her that made the prairie seem more alive the moment she appeared. "Well, you must be Jack Thornton," she called out. Her voice was firm and cheerful. "I hope you're ready for me." "I don't do small," she laughed, a warm, hearty sound that carried over the prairie wind. Jack swallowed hard. He hadn't expected her to joke like that, and it made his chest tighten in surprise. I, yes. I'm Jack," he managed to say, his voice cracking slightly from nerves. He dismounted slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. All those weeks of waiting, all the letters, all the imagining, it came down to this one encounter. And suddenly, everything felt uncertain. She was not at all what he had pictured. Martha walked down the wagon steps confidently, brushing dust off her dress and straightening her posture. She was tall, broad, and sturdy, the kind of woman who could carry a heavy sack of grain or lift a full water pail without hesitation. Her eyes met Jack's, and she gave him a playful grin. "You look smaller in person," she said, laughing. Breath. "I hope you can handle a woman like me." Jack cleared his throat, trying to hide the surprise in his expression. He had expected someone gentle, someone who might rely on him for strength. But here was someone so strong and self-assured it was almost intimidating. And yet there was a warmth in her gaze, a friendliness that made him feel as though he had known her for longer than a few letters. "Well, I think I can manage," Jack said finally, trying to meet her humor with his own. He gestured toward the ranch, toward the house behind him. "Let me show you, Martha nodded, taking in the surrounding prairie as she walked. Appreciate the open space, the endless horizon, and the simplicity of the ranch. "It's beautiful out here," she said, her voice softer now, almost reverent. "I can feel the wind and the land. It smells so fresh." She paused, looking at Jack. "I think I might like it." Jack led her up the path to the house. The wooden planks of the porch creaked beneath their feet.
He opened the door and gestured inside.
The house was small but tidy. A fire burned in the hearth, filling the room with warmth and light. Jack had prepared a small guest room for her. A bed was neatly made, a small chest of drawers stood against the wall, and a clean wash basin sat on a table. He had even swept the floor carefully, hoping she would feel at home. Martha looked around the room and let out a soft whistle. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, her voice full of admiration. "It's perfect." "I can already tell you, Kara." She turned to Jack with a grin. "And I like that. I like a man who works hard and cares." Jack felt a strange warmth rise in his chest. He wasn't used to compliments, especially from a stranger. He nodded and said quietly, Back the back, back the back, back the back. Back another piece.
Well, you're doing a good job. I can tell this place has been waiting for someone like me, she said, stepping toward the window to look out at the prairie.
And I have to say, I've been waiting for something like this, too. A place with space, work to do, and a man who can keep up with me.
Jack blinked, unsure how to respond.
Her words were confident, almost teasing, and they made his nerves twist in a strange way.
Breaths. He had thought he would teach her, show her how life worked on the ranch, but now he wondered if he would need to keep up with her. After a short moment, Jack coughed to cover his uncertainty. I guess we'll figure it out together, he said. Martha turned toward him, her grin widening. I like the sound of that. I've always been good at figuring things out. Life's too short to wait around, don't you think? Jack nodded slowly, feeling a mix of relief and admiration.
She was bold, yes, but she was also practical.
And that, he realized, might be exactly what he needed. Over the next hour, they walked around the ranch together. Jack showed her the barn, the stables, the pens where the cattle were kept. He explained his daily routine, feeding the animals at dawn, checking fences, mending broken tools, and maintaining the water troughs. Martha listened attentively, asking questions, occasionally teasing him about the complexity of his chores. You've got a lot of work to do, she said, brushing some dust off her sleeves as she examined the fence posts. I like it. I've never minded hard work. In fact, I think I'll like helping out. Jack's lips twitched into a small smile. I think you'll fit right in, he said. Martha laughed again, a hearty, contagious laugh that made Jack feel lighter than he had in years. I hope so, she said. I don't plan on being a delicate flower. I plan on rolling up my sleeves and getting things done.
And you better be ready for it, Jack chuckled, feeling some of his nervous tension fade.
He realized that she wasn't just a stranger stepping into his life. She was someone who might actually make it richer, fuller, and more alive. And strangely, he felt grateful for it. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the prairie, Martha helped Jack gather some hay for the animals. She carried the bales with ease and even managed to stack them neatly in the barn. Jack watched, impressed by her strength and determination. He had worried that she might not be used to ranch life, that she might struggle with the physical labor. But she handled it naturally, with a grace and power that left him quietly admiring her. When the work was done, they sat together on the porch, wiping sweat from their brows and watching the sun sink behind the hills. The air was cool, the wind gentle, and the sky turned shades of orange and pink. For a moment, neither spoke. They just sat there, taking in the quiet and the beauty of the prairie. Finally, Martha broke the silence. I think we're going to get along just fine, Jack, she said softly. I don't mean that in a casual way. I mean we understand each other already. You like the quiet, the work, the land. I like the same things. And Jack felt a lump in his throat. He had hoped for companionship, someone to share his life, but hearing her say it so openly made his heart beat faster. I like you too, he said, simply. Brant. It was the truth, and saying it aloud felt right. They watched the first stars appear in the night sky, the prairie stretching endlessly before them.
Jack realized that life would not be the same again. It would be fuller, busier, louder at times, and maybe even harder in some ways.
But it would also be richer, warmer, and filled with laughter. That night, Martha settled into the small room Jack had prepared for her. She unpacked her few belongings, placing them neatly in the chest of drawers. Jack noticed how comfortable she seemed, how at ease she was in this new, unfamiliar place. He had expected nervousness, hesitation, even fear, but she was ready. She was bold, strong, and confident. And somehow, that made Jack feel braver too. Before he left her to rest, he stood in the doorway and said, "Tomorrow, I'll show you the rest of the ranch, Britt, and maybe we can start some chores together." Martha smiled up at him, her eyes twinkling. "I'll be ready. And don't worry, I work fast." Jack nodded, feeling a small surge of hope. The woman who had stepped off that wagon, unexpected, strong, twice his size, full of life, was not what he had imagined. But maybe, he realized, she was exactly what he needed. As he closed the door and walked back to his own room, Jack felt a quiet excitement. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. The prairie was still wide and empty, the wind still whispered through the grass, but now there was laughter, warmth, and life to fill the space. And he knew deep down that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. The next morning the sun rose over the prairie, spilling golden light across the land. Jack woke early, as usual, and stepped out onto the porch. He could hear Martha moving around inside, humming a tune while unpacking. He smiled to himself. It was strange, but in a good way, to hear another voice in the house. A voice that was bright, confident, and full of energy. After a quick breakfast of eggs and coffee, Jack suggested, "Why don't we start with the barn? There's a lot to do before the day gets hot." Martha nodded eagerly, tying her hair back and rolling up her sleeves. "Lead the way," she said. "I'm ready for some work." Jack felt a flicker of relief. He had worried that she might not be used to ranch work, that the chores would be too much for her, or that she might be timid. But she was bold, strong, and surprisingly graceful as she followed him to the barn. The first task was feeding the animals. Jack handed her a bucket of grain, showing her how to measure it for each cow. Martha watched carefully, nodding as she understood, then began pouring the feed with steady hands. Jack could see the muscles in her arms working as she carried heavy buckets with ease. He felt a mix of admiration and pride. She was strong, capable, and willing to learn. But as they worked, they talked. Martha told Jack about her life before the prairie, how she had grown up on a small farm with many siblings, how she had learned to cook, sew, and take care of animals from an early age. Jack listened quietly, occasionally asking questions. He felt a connection growing between them, a sense that they were beginning to understand each other in ways that words alone could not express. When the feeding was done, Jack suggested they mend the fence along the northern pasture. It was a hot job, requiring strength and patience. Jack had started alone before, but with Martha's help, the work went faster. They carried posts together, hammered nails into the wooden planks, and tied the wire tightly. Martha laughed when she missed a nail and hammered it crookedly, joking that it gave the fence character. Jack couldn't help but chuckle. "You're making fun of me," she said with mock indignation. "I am strong and capable. Watch this." She swung the hammer with more force, striking the nail perfectly in place. Jack nodded in approval, impressed by her skill. "I admit it," he said. "You're better than I expected," Martha grinned. "That's because I'm twice the woman you thought you were getting," she teased. Jack laughed quietly, shaking his head. Her humor, her boldness, her confidence, it was all new to him. And yet, he felt lighter, happier, and somehow more alive. After finishing the fence, they moved on to stacking hay in the barn. The bales were heavy, and the task required teamwork. At first, they struggled to lift them together properly, fumbling as they tried to coordinate their movements. A bale slipped from Martha's hands and landed with a soft thump on the floor. She laughed, throwing her hands in the air. "Well, that didn't go as planned," she said. Jack couldn't help but laugh with her. "I think the hay has a mind of its own," he replied. Breath. They tried again, this time communicating more carefully, lifting and stacking with a rhythm they quickly found together. By the end of the morning, the barn was neat and organized, the hay stacked high and steady. Martha wiped sweat from her brow, smiling proudly. "See? I told you I could do it," she said. Jack nodded, feeling a swell of respect for her. "You've got a good hand for this, and you don't shy away from work," he said. Martha shrugged. "I never have. Life's easier when you do what needs to be done." The rest of the day passed in a similar rhythm. They tended the animals, repaired small tools, and worked in the garden. Sometimes Martha would make a joke that would send Jack laughing so hard he had to sit down and catch his breath. Other times Jack would share small stories of the ranch, his father, and life in the prairie. They learned from each other, their bond growing stronger with each passing hour. Despite the hard work, there were small moments of humor that made the day lighthearted. At one point, Martha tried to squeeze through the barn door while carrying a full bucket of water. She misjudged the width and got stuck for a moment, laughing loudly as she wiggled free. Broke. Jack helped her, chuckling at her dramatic exit. "You'll never live that one down," he teased. "I don't care," she said, still laughing. "That's going in the story of the first day." Jack shook his head, smiling. He had never imagined his life could be this lively, this full of laughter, and yet he felt grateful. He realized that Martha's presence, her strength, humor, and confidence made the ranch feel alive in a way it had never felt before. As the afternoon sun began to lower, they took a break and sat on the porch, drinking water and wiping sweat from their brows. Martha leaned back against the wooden railing, stretching her arms. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "this place, it's bigger than I imagined. And yet, it feels like home already. I think we'll make a good team." Jack nodded slowly. "I think so, too?"
I think so too. Well, it's easier than I thought it would be with you here.
Bray.
They watched the prairie together, the golden grass swaying gently in the breeze. For the first time, Jack felt that the loneliness he had carried for years was beginning to lift.
The quiet was still there, but now it was shared, and it felt richer. Martha's laughter, her voice, her energy. It filled the empty spaces and made the ranch feel alive. That evening after supper, Martha helped Jack tend to the animals one last time before the sun fully set. They checked the water troughs, made sure the cattle were settled, and inspected the barn for any repairs that might be needed in the night. When the work was done, they stood side by side watching the sky darken and the stars appear.
"You work hard," Martha said softly, her voice carrying a tone of admiration. "I can see why this ranch runs so well."
"You care about everything here." Jack felt a small warmth in his chest. I try," he said simply. "It's all I know." Martha smiled.
And that's enough. You're good at it, Jack. And you're not alone anymore.
The next few days followed a similar pattern. Jack and Martha worked side by side, learning each other's habits and rhythms. Sometimes they disagreed. Jack was precise and careful. Martha was bold and improvisational, but they always found a way to compromise. Jack learned to appreciate her practical solutions, her laughter that made even hard tasks lighter. Martha learned to understand Jack's patience, his quiet ways, and the depth of his care for the land and animals. There were moments of quiet connection, too. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat by the fire, sharing a simple meal of stew and bread. The fire crackled, and the prairie stretched endlessly beyond the windows. Martha spoke about her dreams of living a life full of freedom, work, and laughter. Jack shared small stories of his father, of lessons learned on the ranch, and of nights spent under the stars, dreaming of companionship. Martha said after a pause, I think this is the start of something good. Not perfect, but real. And I like real. Brave. Jack looked at her, feeling a mix of awe and warmth.
That's all I've wanted. Someone who
understands this life, this land, and me. Martha reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. I understand more than you think, she said, smiling. By the end of the week, the routines were settling in. Jack had started to anticipate Martha's humor, her jokes, and her energy. Martha had begun to notice the small, quiet ways Jack showed care for the ranch, the animals, and her. They had fallen into a rhythm, learning to balance each other's strengths and weaknesses. The ranch was busier, the days longer, but the work felt lighter because they did it together. Even the animals seemed to respond to Martha's presence. The cows came to her when she called, the horses nickered as she approached, and the barn felt warmer somehow. Jack noticed it, quietly smiling to himself.
Life had changed in ways he hadn't expected, and yet
it felt right. At night, as Martha settled into her room, Jack stood in the doorway for a moment. Tomorrow will be another busy day, he said softly. I'll be ready, she replied confidently. And don't worry, I plan to work as hard as you do. Maybe even harder. Jack chuckled. I'll hold you to that. He closed the door and walked back to his own room, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known for years. The prairie was still wide and quiet, the stars shining overhead, but now it was full of life, laughter, and the beginning of something extraordinary. But Jack Thornton, the loner rancher, the mail-order bride who had stepped off that wagon, strong, bold, and full of life, was not what he had expected. But she was exactly what he needed. And together, they would face the challenges, joys, and work of the prairie, learning and growing side by side, discovering that companionship and love could come in the most unexpected ways. Days passed quietly on the ranch, and Jack and Martha continued settling into their rhythm. The work was steady, the prairie vast and calm, and the evenings peaceful. Jack had grown used to Martha's presence, her laughter echoing in the barn, her playful teasing during chores, and the easy way she handled animals and work. He realized he had never felt this happy in years. One late afternoon, while checking the fences along the western pasture, Jack noticed a dark line on the horizon. At first he thought it was a shadow from the hills, but as he squinted he saw the clouds moving fast, darker than anything he had seen in months. The wind began to pick up, rustling the tall prairie grass and waves. Jack's heart sank a little. The storm was coming, and it looked strong. He hurried back to the house, calling out for Martha. She appeared in the doorway with a wide-brimmed hat in hand, smiling despite the growing wind. Something's coming, isn't it? She asked. Jack nodded grimly. A storm.
A big one. We need to prepare. Now.
Martha didn't hesitate. She grabbed buckets, ropes, and tools, her face set in determination. "Lead the way. We've got work to do," she said. Her confidence steadied Jack, who felt a surge of appreciation for her courage. They worked quickly, securing the barn doors, stacking extra hay inside to prevent it from flying away, and tying down loose tools. The wind grew stronger, bending the tall grass into waves, whipping dust and small debris across the prairie. Jack noticed how natural Martha was at the work, how she moved with strength and precision, never panicking. He realized that this woman, twice his size and physical presence, was larger still in courage and determination.
The cattle began to sense the storm too. Pal!
They gathered near the barn, lowing softly in confusion. Jack and Martha moved among them, calming them, guiding them to safer areas, and ensuring none got trapped or hurt. The sky darkened, turning a deep gray, and the first drops of rain began to fall. By the time they finished preparing, the storm hit in full force. Rain pounded the roof, wind tore through the prairie, and lightning lit up the sky. Jack and Martha watched from the porch, soaked through, listening to the roar of the storm around them. The animals were safe in the barn, the fences secured, and the tools tied down, but the raw power of the storm was awe-inspiring.
"We did everything we could," Jack shouted over the wind.
Martha nodded.
"Yes."
"Now we ride it out." She smiled at him, though both of them were drenched and shivering. There was a sense of shared triumph, even in the chaos. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the barn. A strong gust had blown part of the roof loose, and a beam shifted dangerously. Jack's heart raced. "The barn!" he shouted. "We have to secure it before it collapses." Without hesitation, Martha grabbed one end of a heavy rope, and Jack grabbed the other. Together they ran through the mud and rain to the barn, their boots slipping slightly on the soaked ground. Inside, the beam threatened to fall on some of the hay, and water poured through the gaps in the roof. "Hold it steady!" Jack yelled. Martha tightened her grip, and together they managed to anchor the beam with additional supports, keeping it from crashing down. The barn groaned under the wind, but their quick actions saved it from serious damage. After ensuring the barn was safe, they turned to the smaller tasks, moving a stack of firewood into a sheltered area, covering the garden beds with tarps, and checking on the fences along the northern pasture. Every task required strength, patience, and teamwork. Martha's boldness and Jack's careful planning made them an excellent pair, each complementing the other perfectly. When the worst of the storm passed, they stood together in the barn listening to the rain still falling in sheets outside. Barn smelled of wet hay, wood, and earth.
Both were soaked and exhausted, but a sense of pride and accomplishment filled them.
"You know,"
Martha said, smiling at Jack despite their wet clothes and muddy boots,
"we make a pretty good team."
Jack nodded, catching his breath. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad you're here. I couldn't have handled this storm alone. Martha reached out and placed a hand on his arm. And I'm glad I'm here too. You've taught me a lot about patience and care, and I've shown you a bit about courage and boldness. Together we're stronger than the storm. Jack felt a lump in his throat. Her words, spoken simply and honestly, made him realize how much he had come to rely on her, not just for help with work, but for companionship, support, and shared strength. The next day, after the storm had passed completely, the prairie looked different. The grass was bent and glistening with rain. The sky was clear, and the air smelled fresh and clean. Some fences had been damaged and the barn roof needed repairs, but nothing was beyond fixing. Jack and Martha moved through the ranch, assessing the damage together. Breaths. As they worked side by side, their bond deepened further. Martha handled the heavy lifting, while Jack fixed smaller repairs. They laughed when a loose roof tile nearly hit Jack on the head and joked about the storm as they worked in the mud. The shared experience of facing something powerful and dangerous had created a connection stronger than either had anticipated. By evening, the ranch was back in order. They sat together on the porch, drinking warm tea and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The prairie was calm again, almost as if the storm had never happened. But Jack knew it had changed something. Himself, Martha, and the life they were beginning to share. Martha leaned back against the railing, her face glowing with satisfaction. "We did it," she said simply. Jack smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude.
Yes, we did.
And I think we can handle anything, as long as we're together. Martha reached out and took his hand. "I think so too, Jack. I've never felt this. Right before. With you, with this land, it all feels like it's where I'm meant to be." Jack's heart swelled. He had imagined companionship, someone to share his life, but Martha was more than he had hoped for. She was strong, caring, courageous, and full of laughter. She had not only accepted his world, but had become a part of it, adding life, warmth, and energy to every corner of the ranch.
That night, as the stars appeared in the clear sky, Jack and Martha sat by the fire, sharing a simple meal.
They spoke quietly about the storm, the animals, and their hopes for the future. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across their faces. Jack realized that he had found not just a helper, not just a companion, but a partner in every sense of the word.
"You know," Martha said softly, stirring the stew, "storms are scary."
But they also show you what really matters. And tonight, I know what matters. Narration. Jack looked at her, his eyes meeting hers. "And what is that?" he asked. "Breath." Martha smiled, a warm, tender smile. "Us. Psst. Working together, caring for this land, and facing life side by side. That's what matters, Bray."
Jack nodded slowly, feeling a deep sense of peace. For years he had lived alone, strong but lonely.
He had wondered if he would ever find someone who understood this life, who could share the quiet days and the hard work. And now he had found her. Martha, strong, bold, and full of life, had stepped into his world, and together they had faced a storm and come out stronger. The fire burned low, the prairie stretched endlessly around them, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt completely at home, not just on the land, but with Martha by his side. He knew there would be more storms in the future, more hard days and challenges, but he also knew they could face them together. Martha reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "No matter what comes," she said, "we'll handle it. Together." Jack smiled, squeezing back. "Together," he agreed. As the night grew quiet, they finally went inside to their respective rooms. Jack paused at the door to glance at Martha, who was already settling in, smiling softly. He realized that life would never be the same again. The prairie was still vast, still quiet in parts, but now it was filled with laughter, warmth, and love. And that was more than enough. For Jack Thornton, the loner rancher, the woman who had stepped off the stagecoach, twice his size and presence, larger still in heart and courage, was not what he had expected, but she was exactly what he needed. Together they had faced the storm, and together they would face every day to come. And that, Jack realized as he finally lay down to sleep, was the truest happiness he had ever known.